Hello everyone. Today I am here to discuss classical conditioning theory. So in my last lecture we studied what learning is, and now it's time to study further, which is theories. So classical conditioning theory is one of the learning theory. So this is classical because this one is very first theory which was brought up by Ivan Pavlov. So actually Pavlov basically wanted to study the process of gastric secretion in dog. He wasn't intended to study classical conditioning. He was intended to study the gastric secretion, that means the drooling of dog, the salivation of dog. Okay, but during this process he understood, okay, he observed that dog is being conditioned to certain actions, to certain incidents. Okay, here in this theory, association is very important. Okay, there is association of two different stimuli and they produce a new learned response or produce a new learned behavior. Behavior is learned, and as a learner, we have to practice this behavior for a certain period of time to make it natural. Okay, so the association between two different stimuli has to be there, and this association has to produce a new response which is learned and practiced. So there are three stages of classical conditioning. Number one stage is before conditioning. So what happens before conditioning? Okay, in a natural setup, there is unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. Okay, for example, the dog. Pavlov is experimenting on dog. So for the dog, Pavlov gives a plate of food, right? And let's move on to the next slide. It will be better to understand. Okay, a plate of food is given to dog, which is unconditioned stimulus. All right, this is unconditioned because there is no mixture, there is no external forces in it. This is natural unconditioned stimulus, and this unconditioned stimulus will produce unconditioned response, which is salivation. Dog will salivate at the sight of the food. Dog will drool when the dog sees food. Okay, that means unconditioned stimulus produces unconditioned response because this response is not conditioned. This response is natural. Right at the sight of the food, the dog will drool. Okay, let's go back. In this respect, no new behavior has been learned. So this salivation, okay, this is a behavior which is already there. It is not learned by the dog. And apart from this, no new behavior is being learned. So there is no disturbance from any outer arena. Okay, nobody has disturbed this process. You just give a natural stimulus or unconditioned stimulus, and the dog will respond unconditionally. Okay, also there is one more stimulus involved here, that is a neutral stimulus. Okay, that neutral stimulus is something else. Neutral stimulus is not unconditioned stimulus. Neutral stimulus, for example, a bell. You ring a bell, okay, for the dog. The dog will not react to it. Dog will not respond because the bell is not related to dog. Alright, so dog will not think anything about it. Dog will just sit there and do nothing. Because here the pairing hasn't been done yet. Okay, neutral stimulus hasn't been paired or associated with any unconditioned stimulus. So natural stimulus could be a person, object, place, anything. Next is stage 2 during conditioning. So here you see that unconditioned stimulus is paired up with conditioned stimulus. So here we had unconditioned stimulus as food, okay, from previous slide. So conditioned stimulus here is bell. So when you use this conditioned stimulus as neutral stimulus earlier, it didn't work out. But once you pair up your unconditioned stimulus and conditioned stimulus, then the dog will drool, the dog will salivate, because the dog has this habit, the behavior to drool over at the sight of the food. The dog will response. The dog will show unconditioned response. It's not like dog will salivate at the sound of the bell, but dog will salivate at the sight of the food. But when food is paired up with bell, then dog will salivate. And this practice will go on for a certain number of days, because in learning, practice is must. So after conditioning, when the dog has undergone practice, now this conditioned stimulus is there. Okay, unconditioned stimulus is removed, food is removed, now only bell, that is conditioned stimulus, is there, which was before neutral stimulus. Okay, so just at the sound of the bell, now the dog will salivate. Now salivation is called conditioned response, because the habit of salivation has been conditioned here due to the process of classical conditioning. Okay, so because the dog is not actually meant to salivate at the sound of the bell, but this habit of the dog has been conditioned, okay, to salivate at the sound of the bell. Then you see this picture here. This is first stage, and this is second, and this is third stage. So in first stage you see that there is food and dog is drooling. Okay, so food is unconditioned stimulus, which is natural, and unconditioned response, which is also natural, and it is very natural for the dog to salivate at the sight of the food. And another aspect here in first stage itself is neutral stimulus, which was the sound of the bell, and dog has nothing to do with the sound of the bell. And you ring the bell, dog will not respond, because the conditioning hasn't been done yet. The pairing of this and this hasn't done yet. Okay, now in the second stage the pairing is done. Now food plus the sound of the bell, and you see the dog is drooling, because the dog is salivating at the sight of the food. After practice of few days, the dog will now salivate at the sound of the bell, because the association or pairing has already been done here in second stage. Okay, now the dog will salivate only when dog hears the sound of the bell. So this is classical conditioning, and in next video I will cover up some more aspects of classical conditioning.